I'm going to give you 4 important details when it comes to aiming your recurve bow. For those of you that are new here, my name is Jake Kaminsky. I am a 2-time Olympic silver medalist in the sport of archery, and I have a whole lot of experience when it comes to shooting recurve bows. I shot full-time for over 12 years as a professional archer, and now I am assembling a bunch of videos on YouTube explaining to you my experience and sharing my knowledge when it comes to basically everything to do with a recurve bow, from tuning to form, and as well as some physical training as well. So if you haven't by now, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to be notified every time a new video is uploaded. I would also like to take time to thank my Patreon supporters. Thank you specifically to them because they are supporting me. They are giving me the ability to put more of this content out. And so if you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, there will be a link in the description below, as well as I will put a card at the top up here. You're watching the Jake Kaminsky YouTube channel. Okay, the first thing when it comes to aiming a recurve bow is that you need to focus on the target. I have many people in the beginning stages of their archery experience have asked me questions about, or complained to me about, problems of they can only see their sight pin or they can only see their target, depending on which one they're focusing on. So I will ask them, well, are you looking at one thing or the other? And they almost always will say, like, say if they can't see the target, they're looking at their sight pin and they're not looking at the actual target. And this can be a bit confusing, but the best way to think about it is you need to look at what you want to hit. Your eyes should stay focused on where you are trying to make your arrow go, and then let your body, let your sight float independent of where you want that arrow to go, as long as you're continuing to focus on hitting here and letting your subconscious take over your aiming pattern. So a big mistake that people will do is they focus on where the sight pin is, and then they start panicking anytime it is not in the middle. Or they wait until that sight pin touches somewhere near the center and then they fire right away. So it is best to aim at the target, aim in the center with your eyes, and look where you want the arrow to go, and then try to push the arrow that direction with the tension and direction that I've covered in another video. I'll put a link to in the description of where you can find the tension and direction video. So that leads me to my second point of you should use eye focus to aim. So this is something that Coach Lee always has said, is that use more eye focus. And we'd hear that very often on the range while we were trying to learn his method and shooting with him full time. So the way we aim is with our eyes. I kind of said it in the step before. Aiming with your eyes is really simple. All you're doing is looking where you want the arrow to go, okay? But you can take that to the next step and try to push the arrow to that direction. It's really important to focus where you want that arrow to go, especially when you go outside and the wind is blowing and your sight pin's not just making its normal movement in random directions somewhere near the target, but if the wind's blowing you and pushing you off the center of the target, you know, it's kind of hard and can be very distracting while your sight pin is over in the blue or the black when you're trying to look over in the center when you're aiming. Now, we're going to get into how to aim in the wind, but what I want you to understand when it comes to eye focus is you need to focus where you want that arrow to go, ignore where the sight pin is, basically, and only focus on controlling your eyes, okay? If you can do that, chances are you're going to not change the way you're executing. That means you're not going to change the way you're expanding, the way you're going to set the clicker off. So that means you're not changing the power, you're not changing the speed, you're not going to pluck and collapse and do all of those things if you're not distracted by your sight pin moving all over the place. You need to focus on where you want the arrow to go, continue to hit your markers when it comes to form, and allow your subconscious to take over to try to make that arrow go in the middle. Now, this is going to sidetrack a little bit from the 4 main things when it comes to aiming a recurve bow, but I need you to understand that when we are shooting a recurve, it is more of a subconscious thing. It is not a conscious thing. So what do I mean when I say subconscious? I mean that your body, your physical body, will adjust and make minute adjustments that you normally couldn't do consciously. It can react quicker and do things much quicker than you can consciously. So if you're consciously focused on executing your form correctly and pushing where you want the arrow to go, your body will take over. It will try to correct any little mistakes to make that arrow go in the center, especially once you become more proficient. So compound is more of a active aiming sport. It's a conscious aiming sport. So that means that if their sight pin's not in the middle when their release breaks, chances are the arrow is not going to go in the middle. Whereas with recurve, our sight pin can be very far from the center, and as long as you execute the same way, with the same rhythm and timing, the same tension and direction, the way you want it to go, your body can correct those mistakes and make the arrow go in the center. I've had that happen personally many, many times. I've had my sight pin as far down as the black at 70 meters, still executed a good shot and still shot a 10. So it's really, really not as important where your sight pin is as many people think. The third important detail to think about when aiming a recurve bow is aiming off. So this is specific to outdoors, obviously, because that's the only time that there's wind. So the wind is an ever-changing thing. It changes from moment to moment and very drastically throughout the day. So I never ever suggest that you move your sight to adjust for the wind. Now, vertically, I may adjust my sight if I'm hitting slightly high or slightly low, because it's easier to add a couple of clicks here or there to adjust from a slight headwind to a slight tailwind, okay? Not that critical compared to a crosswind. A crosswind, you will drift drastic amounts of differences from a slight left to a slight right wind. So, say if you started the day and the wind was blowing this direction, and your arrow started impacting over here, and you moved your sight to get your arrows back to impacting in the middle, what happens when the wind dies that next arrow? Well, then you just shot over here. You shot an 8 instead of shooting a 10, right? Or if the wind's blowing this way and then it switches direction and goes this way, which it does all the time, especially in a very tight field with a lot of trees surrounding it, the wind switches directions all the time, so you have to adjust constantly. And from one end to another, you may forget where your sight is left to right. So I never ever suggest moving your sight left to right unless you wake up, it's very calm that day, and you're hitting just off the center. Then of course, move your sight to get the arrows in the middle. But when it's windy, never move your sight pin left to right. You need to aim off. How do I aim off? And how do I suggest you aim off? So if this is your 10 ring, obviously, you're aiming here, there's no wind, you're hitting here. Great. You start hitting over here. What do? Most people would say, well, put your sight pin here. Correct. But many, many people will put their sight pin here, but still kind of look this direction, or still think that this is their 10 ring on this spot over here. In reality, yeah, this is still your 10 ring and this is your 8 ring. That's where you're aiming, or just where you're aiming, right? But I can tell you without a doubt that if I just aimed here and still looked over here, or still knew that this was my 10 ring, as the shot broke, my body and my subconscious would want to take over and push the arrow towards the right because my 10 ring is over here, not here. So instead of drifting from here and landing here, it will drift and land here because it's a weaker shot. It's not the same. You've changed your form. If this is not your new 10 ring, you're going to shoot a weaker or a different shot and your arrow will drift different. So if this is where I need to aim off, this is my new 10 ring. My new 10 ring is right here. So this is all I need to be focused on, is executing right here. This is now where I'm focused with my eyes. This is now where I'm pushing the arrow because I want the arrow to go here, but then the wind takes over and drifts it to here. You will drift far less in the wind if you act as if your 10 ring is where you are aiming off. It will change your life outdoors. One quick thing to take into consideration when aiming off in the wind is how big the 10 ring is, or how big the gold is, right? So many people, when they're aiming off and they start aiming in the 8 ring, they think that they've got to keep their sight like right here. But if you look how big the 9 ring is, and I'm aiming in the 8 ring, all I've got to do is keep my sight pin above that line and below this line, and I'm still going to hit the gold. And then if I make it a 10 ring size line, here to here, that's a pretty large area to still hit the 10 ring. But then take it the next step and go left to right. So this 10 ring is about 6 centimeters. So if I center that, look how big this area is that my sight pin or where I'm aiming at could be anywhere within there. As long as I still execute a really good shot and the wind hasn't changed, I can still hit a 10. So you don't have to really focus a whole lot finer when you're aiming off. Many people will stress about trying to hold their sight pin exactly where they're trying to aim off, and that can cause a whole lot of problems. If you realize that your margin for error is quite large, especially if you're looking at the 9 ring, your margin for error is like this to still hit a 9. Obviously, we're trying to go for 10s here, so you're really trying to hold it there, and you're really trying to hit the center of the 10 in case you do have a small issue and then only miss where you're aiming by a little bit. But I still want you to think about how important it is to make this your new 10 ring and not to still look here and not to still push there. Now, the last detail is slightly different than the other 3. It is that indoor and outdoor aiming are different. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean that the further distance you shoot, the more subconscious the aiming is, the more important your form is. So that means you can get away with a lackluster aiming pattern a whole lot more if your form is really good. And if your form isn't very good or very consistent, you're also going to have a bit more difficulty shooting well at further distances. So again, further distances are more subconscious, closer distances are more conscious. So the difference between the two is that at 70 meters, I am focused where I want my arrow to go, and I'm letting my sight pin just float anywhere. It's not really important where the sight pin is, with the exception of when it's windy, and then obviously my new 10 ring is off the center, as I've already covered. But when I'm indoors, or even at 30 meters, if my sight pin is not in the 10 ring or very close, regardless of how good of a shot I make, the arrow's not going to go there. It becomes more of a conscious aiming sport, much like compound is. So indoors, especially at 18 meters and you're shooting on a 40 centimeter face, which is smaller than this one, if my sight pin is not within that 10 ring, chances are the arrow is not going to go in the middle. So I have to actively aim a whole lot more. If my sight's just off, I will make sure I push it back to the center. I'm really trying to control my aiming, but I'm really still focused on my form. It's very difficult to do. It takes a lot of experience to be able to go from indoors to outdoors, or far distance to close distance, or vice versa, because of how much aiming at closer distances can distract you from your form. So ultimately you have to, the primary focus is on technique, and the aiming is secondary. At 70 meters or 90 meters, it's almost irrelevant, the aiming or where your sight pin is, but at 30 meters and in, it is absolutely very important. So I notice, like when I'm shooting field archery, 30 meters and in, I have to really pay attention to where my sight pin is and try to hold it in the middle, especially on those close bunnies. But you know, you start getting out past 50 meters and it becomes a lot more of a subconscious passive aiming. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to be notified every time a new video is uploaded. Be sure to head to jkaminsky.com for the books and apparel that I have available. And thank you again for tuning in, and I appreciate it. Take care.